Welcome everyone. My name is Margaret Bierman. Very delighted to welcome you to the open panel of the CRADLE International Symposium 2024. How could generative AI change work integrated learning? And of course, before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we stand, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, but this land is also a little bit Boonwurrung as well too. We're right on the border here, and Boonwurrung land is where I personally live and work, so I'd like to acknowledge those people as well and their country, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and those who are yet to come. And of course, for chat, welcome you to put the country you're on into the chat and acknowledge the countries. So we've had the most tremendously, can I say, exciting past 3 days. And what this panel is about is really reporting back on a symposium whose purpose was to debate, discuss and conceptualise the intersections between higher education placements and generative AI. And I'm going to just give you a very light framing for that. It's pretty much the framing we had at the start of our own symposium before I introduced our 4 panellists to you. So this was what our purpose was, and the purpose of today is to share that with you. I think you'll get a little sense of our discussions and conceptualisations. We did this discussion around 3 themes. The first was reframing the dynamic relationship between students, university educators and workplaces. And there are other actors in there as we pulled out, but this sort of tension, this sort of confluence of worlds that happens in work integrated learning. And we wanted to see how Gen AI might shift that or might help reframe that. The second theme was about troubling pedagogies for workplace learning in light of generative AI. And that's not suggesting that Gen AI itself is doing the troubling, but that perhaps pedagogies for workplace learning themselves could do with another eye over, and that generative AI gives us an opportunity to think again, both in general and also how these might change in this new era, if you might like, of artificial intelligence. The third theme is critically examining the role of generative AI as a new agent in workplace assessment and feedback practices. And of course, we are CRADLE, so you'd expect to see some assessment and feedback practices in there. And these are the 3 themes we had. We didn't, and they formed a frame, but actually, as you'll see from our panellists' discussion, the themes have become axial. They weave through our conversations rather than directly addressing them piece by piece. Structure of today, I'm setting the scene. I don't think I'll take 15 to 20 minutes. I hope not, but I've given myself a bit of time. We've got 4 panellists. We'll talk to 5-7 minutes each without slides. And after each talk, we might get a response from one of the panellists, maybe a couple, depending on timing. Then we'll have a few questions and we'll bring the formal section to a close. Then is the way in CRADLE seminars, we'll be open for another 30 minutes to ask more questions. We find sometimes on the hour people have to leave. If you do, particularly those online, you just want to sneak out a webinar, absolutely fine. But then we'll have the Q&A will proceed onwards afterwards. If you're online, use chat for chat. Please chat as much or as little as you like. We love chat. Q&A only for questions. The questions will be moderated here and you can upvote them. People in the room, you can use your hands and we won't be doing any upvoting. So I'm going to start off by framing AI. And I think this is a really important thing to do because AI means many different things to different people. And we also, it's so much in the news at the moment. We often all have this sort of big reaction to it. Oh, AI, it means X. And so I wanted to introduce the idea of the paradoxical. And Klaus Hoyer is a colleague that I've worked with, and he's worked for a long time in data intensification in healthcare. And he maintains that data intensification, and that's by implication AI, because he's talking a lot about algorithmic mediation, is paradoxical. So I'm going to shamelessly appropriate his words. And Klaus says that artificial intelligence, my shameless appropriation, creates both less work and more work. It both empowers and disempowers. It both uncovers concerns and covers up concerns. And it tightens organisational control and generates new form of organisational disintegration. And the thing about these paradoxes is that they happen at the same time. So it's not a tension, it can do this or that. It's doing both. And Klaus lays out the account for that in his book about data intensification. And this paradox is often reflected in what we think about AI. In the workplace, it can do these amazing things and it has these terrible impacts, and both can be true at once. I'm going to skip now to the idea of defining AI, because this is also really helpful. Proposing 3 types of definitions. This is work that Rolla and I have been working on for this year and last year. Technological definitions, capability definitions, and social definitions. And the reason I'm raising here is I think it's really useful to understand this vis-a-vis a conversation about will. And you can hold multiple definitions at the same time. They're not competing. So technological definitions really use the technology to define machine learning, expert systems, neural networks, the list goes on. And in this instance, I guess we're talking about generative AI. Large language models, and I often talk about them as being a highly sophisticated form of predictive text. It's statistical predictions based on a large corpus of data. It seeks to produce a commonly anticipated response. It sounds like it shouldn't do anything when you put it like that, but of course, as we know, it's incredibly sophisticated. It's incredibly compelling. I also want to point out it's not just ChatGPT, this technology. ChatGPT is one version of it. There are others. You can build your own large language model system. You can build your own chatbot. So that's what's in the box. The other way to think about things is capabilities, what the AI can do. A lot of the time AIs tend to be towards decision-making capabilities, what Norvig and Russell classically call the best possible action in a situation. Sometimes capabilities are defined quite specifically, like seeking a driverless car, or a chatbot is a kind of capability in itself, or image generation. And I just want to point out that despite what we may think, generative AI's capabilities in higher education is not just about cheating. I'm sure everyone in the room knows that, but I just thought I'd give that little reminder. Gen AI can do other things in the education context as well. And the third way of thinking about it, and whether or not you would also want to put cheating into this category, and if you would even call it cheating, you might want to call it assessment validity, for example, we can think about AI as part of a social system. So in this way, we think about AI and us in the same moment. We're not separating the AI from ourselves. We do AI together. So Johnson and Verdecchio talk about AI systems, which are assemblages of people and things and artifacts and contexts. And that's a really useful frame, particularly in the workplace. Rolla and I have also written about AI interactions, which is interested in what the person and the AI do together. And we suggest that if you don't know whether the machine is right or wrong, that's when it's being artificially intelligent, because that's when you take the leap of faith and you have to say, I'm letting you do something that I don't know already. So that means it's always dynamic. So that's just laying the ground sort of path about AI, one half of our equation. The other half of our equation is will. Now, I think there's a lot less contestation about will. I know the will people here might disagree with me because there are some hot debates about what will is as well too. But I think in general, it's a little bit more cohesive in its account. And what we mean by work integrated learning, it's It's an umbrella term for a range of approaches and strategies, and they assemble the formal academic curriculum with experiences of work. And here, we're very interested in placements. The reason we're interested in placements is because our proposition for this symposium is Gen AI is changing the world of higher education. Sure, we're all part of it, but it's also equally changing the world of work. So you have a confluence of two changes happening at the same time. So very interested in placement. And placements are places where students go out into workplaces and they are students, but they're often doing things in the workplace that workers might do. That's ideal. And they can be loosely coupled, which is to say they are not necessarily tightly tied to the curriculum, or they can be tightly coupled, like professional placements. A physiotherapist going on a physiotherapy placement, a teacher going on teacher education placement, there's a curriculum. It's very clear what that placement is going to do. So in this instance, we cover both, and they're quite different in many ways, even though they have lots of similarities. And the final point I want to make about placement is students on placement learn practice through tacit, embodied forms of knowledge as much as anything else. It's important to physically be there, to know where things are, how the corridors work, where you park your car, all those sorts of things form into an experience of workplace learning. It's embodied, let alone some people have genuinely touch-based practices as well too. So I'm going to add some framing thoughts drawn from recent empirical research very quickly. And this is from work I've been working on. So, I'm just inserting a little bit here. What do we know about student use of Gen AI? A paper we have under review at the moment is that it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere, it's diverse. Students are not all doing the same thing, and they're doing considerable moral grappling. They're not taking it lightly. The questions we have about, am I lazy? What is learning? What is my assessment? How do I own it? Students are doing that as well too. What do we know about workplace use of AI? I'm going to use AI here. This is a piece of work I did just around the introduction of Gen AI a little bit before. So it's messy. Nothing works as promised. Workers use these efficiency, accuracy trade-offs. So they balance one against the other. I'll make it quicker, but I know that I might have to check more. Is that worth it? What are the stakes? And it's strongly disciplinary. Healthcare workers use AI in different ways to lawyers, use it in different way to educators. So again, some framing thoughts. Now, that is all from me. That's the setup that we had for our symposium. And now I'm so delighted to introduce our panel to you. And what I'm going to do, because I asked, how do you want to be introduced? And no one had any really good ideas. I said, leave it up to you, Margaret. So it is being left up to me. And I'm going to introduce each person just before they speak. And I'm going to introduce them pretty lightly as well. So you can do your own stuff. So I'll let you read who's on the panel, and then I'll basically just hand over. So first of all, we have Dave Cormier, who has been an absolutely delightful participant. He's come all the way from the University of Windsor in Ontario, Canada. That's right. Long flight. And that's it. That's my introduction. Over to you, Dave.
I can use an airplane. So I do come from the University of Windsor. I'm a learning specialist there. It's the land of the Three Fires Confederacy, includes the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. We've done a lot of work with our Indigenous colleagues there, working on trying to do a better job of respecting their place in our community and trying to open our university to them. Not as well as we should be, but doing our best. I come to this in two different ways, and I'll start from the Gen AI side and I'll come to the Will side after. So 2 years ago, I'm not sure if you're aware, ChatGPT came out. And suddenly my life was overwhelmed with discussions about this. I call it my March of Sadness. It involves me going from department to department and sitting down and them going, oh, it's going to be fine. And then I show them how Gen AI works, and then they start to cry. And then somebody inevitably puts up their hand and go, can I retire? And so we have this conversation, right? So I show them initially how these tools work, and then I talk to them about their practice, and we sit down and try to, it's mostly counseling at this point. And I mean, it's good counseling. And in some senses, interestingly, and this is kind of a theme that's come out through our discussion in the last 2.5 days. In some senses, all the advice I'm giving them now is the same advice I would have given them 3 years ago. Get to know your students, be engaged in the process, try to find a way to get your students engaged in the process, stick to your values, remember why you're trying to do this in the first place. And one of the things about Gen AI for me has been this opportunity to actually have that conversation, because they weren't listening to that conversation 2 years ago. So it's been an interesting journey in that sense. And if you're coming to this conversation now, and if any of you online or here are coming to this conversation, the one thing I want to say to you is the same thing I say to all of them, which is 96 or 97% of what you knew before entirely applies now. We're not talking about a revolution in the sense that everything you knew before no longer applies, but rather all of your values, all of your expertise, all those things are still currently relevant, but there's been a couple of changes we really need to address. And starting from that perspective, I think it's a little bit more hopeful when we start engaging this conversation. It could feel overwhelming. If you've not seen something like Notebook LM, the first time you try it, you go, "Oh my, what is even happening here?" So just all of our things still apply. I think so from Gen AI, that's been my experience, is talking to people through this, trying to explain to them how it affects their practice. I've been working with the business community on this as well, and sort of just talking about what the tools can do and what they can't do. And I think that is the literacy I think we can all agree on, is that we need to understand what it can and what it can't do. After that, I think there have been some disagreements about what a Gen AI literacy might be, but understanding its value and its risks, I think, is important for everybody. And everybody, seriously, because she talked about my plane flight. I hurt my back just before the flight, and I went to see a physiotherapist yesterday morning. And she goes, "Hey, what are you doing here from Canada?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm talking about Gen AI." And she goes, "Gen AI? When I was on placement last year," and I start laughing. And she's, "Why are you laughing?" I'm like, "I'm actually at a Gen AI in work informed learning like symposium." And then she went on to tell me about her experience with Gen AI and her placement, because she was worried that the other students in her class who had been using ChatGPT to fill out their reports were not going to be as good at professionals as they could be, because they weren't actually confronting the work inside of that report. That's the physiotherapist from down the street. So clearly, it's not just us who are worried about the place of Gen AI and work and forced learning. So is Shayna, the amazing physiotherapist who helped me with my back. And for me, the work informed learning part, the will part of this, it's work informed, right? I always get messed up. Integrated. Sorry, I'm from away. So for me, that will conversation has come up to me. It starts 4 or 5 years ago when we started talking to the law faculty, my own education group, and the education faculty at my university, social work, and then started spreading out through their communities about a challenge and a lack of tolerance for ambiguity among the students. So that feeling where a student looks at you and goes, can you just tell me what to do? I'm going to do what you tell me to do, and then I'll do it. I'll give it back to you, and we'll all be happy." And we try to confront them with more uncertainty, more challenges. Like, no, 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 that's not the deal we have. You tell me what to do. I do what I'm told, and I hand it back to you. And what they're finding in the placements, and I'll speak to law specifically, is that students are challenged, almost incapable in some cases, of actually going into that room over there and interviewing someone they don't know. Not because they can't talk to people, but because they presume that activity has a right answer. They presume that there's a process that they're supposed to exactly follow. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. That's meant to happen in that room, rather than the uncertainty we find everywhere in the world inside of these situations. So I was already looking at this intolerance for ambiguity, and then Gen AI comes. And I look at that Gen AI conversation, I'm thinking, one of the things that Gen AI can do for you, doesn't have to, as Simon will tell you, but what it can do for you is just give you an answer to the question, right? Without forcing you to deal with that uncertainty, without helping you build that tolerance for ambiguity. And now the workplace has more ambiguity potentially in it with the Gen AI that's there, with the potential for new tools they have to deal with, but also it changes that that feeling that a student has whenever they're confronted with uncertainty in the workplace. It gives them a place to go. It gives them a way to get an answer that doesn't necessarily force them to connect with the people who are there. plus the whole other range of Gen AI implications in that workforce that you're going to find. So I got my 5-minute warning. I think this probably gets me to 6. I'll drop it there.
Any of the other panel members wish to comment? No. Okay. Yeah.
I find it remarkable. I find it remarkable that on a physio placement. I find it remarkable that on a physio placement, in such a tightly coupled placement that we would normally, you know, think is very much about performance-based learning, that Gen AI is dominating so much of their experiences. It's more of a comment, really.
And I didn't cross-examine that woman who was working on my back, so I don't know what school she was at or exactly what that assignment was. What was interesting to me was how quickly it came. It was immediate to her. She's already thought about this several times. She's clearly had this conversation with other people. It was top of mind for her. It came out right away before I even mentioned the wheel section of what I was doing.
Yeah, can I come in?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, what I was picking up from your talk was these, you know.
I just need to introduce you. I actually haven't said who you are yet. So my whole system is not working so well. This is Professor Michael Tomlinson. Also fabulous to have him coming all the way from the University of Southampton. And now you can go back to your microphone.
Yeah, thank you. And it was very much about these intangibles and these unknowns, really, which comes up a lot in the discussion about AI. And, you know, we use metaphors like black box, and we use other descriptors like accepting ambiguity. And they become quite difficult, really, to kind of pin down pedagogically, and particularly in work environments where people kind of want answers. They want to be kind of informed, and they want to know what it's like to be a capable professional. And so there's a kind of tension there between knowing that at one level we are in sort of ambiguous territory, and that kind of need for some kind of certainty and existential stability. And so it's massively fluid. And but it seems also as well, everybody knows a lot about AI, but a lot of us know very little about it. And I'd say that as a higher education teacher, we seem to be in the UK a lot in kind of reaction mode. You know, how do we deal with this generalized other called AI? You know, how do we mediate it? How do we manage its use? How do we encourage, you know, productive dialogue between the student and the system? Yeah.
Yeah, just a brief comment on that. We thought we would be talking about the problematic nature of Gen AI, but the more we engaged in our discussion, the more we found that we were problematizing work integrated learning. And the illustration that Dave gave, that, you know, these students in physiotherapy were using AI to help with their assignment in the workplace assignment, shows that maybe the issue we need to focus on is how we actually maybe reform some of our thinking about work integrated learning, and not just say, hunky-dory, let's just focus on the Gen AI bit.
Technology, geez. All right. So, Michael, can we move to your piece now? That would be grand.
Thank you. So, I mean,
I know.
My main interest has always been in employability and kind of the interaction that has with work-related learning and career development. And I mean, I'm interested in this at both a kind of system level, but also a kind of more micro level, the way in which individuals manage the transition to employment and navigate their options and develop career resources. And I think one of the important themes I think we've discussed is this idea of, you know, harmonization between different institutional levels, and particularly between higher education and workplaces, and for there to be some kind of sharing of practice and harmonization across what are sometimes disparate communities. The other thing I think is important is that workplaces are not homogenous. They're diverse entities, and so Customization, it seems to be quite an important kind of issue, the extent to which AI kind of systems are adapted to the specificities of workplaces. One of the things that we're all passionate about in the symposium is the contested nature of meaningful work. And I think that's a theme that we've all discussed quite at length, you know, how we define that, who defines it, what are the parameters of our definitions of that. And a common theme seems to be that work has to matter to people, that it has to be a significant part of their lives. And themes about, you know, the link between work and self-actualization, the link between work and recognition and reward, and the feeling of being connected to workplaces seems to be very strong in that. And so that leads then to questions about, well, to what extent does Gen AI facilitate people's quest for meaningful work, and how does it help shape meaning making? And I think that's an important kind of facet of these debates. And when I think about work integrated learning, an important part of this is, well, what is the purpose of work integrated learning? You know, I'm learning about definitions such as loosely coupled and tightly coupled. And, you know, it's about kind of what are we trying to equip our learners with in that? What kind of capabilities, capitals, career resources? And I think one of the important things about work integrated learning is it's about helping people deal with a particular professional context and the practice of the context, of the workplace context, because practice and professional development, I think, are so closely kind of integrated. So when I think then about the problem of interface between learners and AI, it's kind of, well, what do we see that relationship as constituting? What is that interaction about? And who is the AI system as an actor? Do we look at them as a mediator between different groups within a workplace organization? Are they, you know, a significant virtual actor, for example, taking on kind of potential virtual roles in a clinic, in a health place practitioner? Are they a critical friend who can offer support on dealing with demanding issues? Are they a listener or a peer support mechanism, a repository for knowledge? So you can see there are lots of kind of modalities of this thing. And then how is it used? Is it used, a term we've talked about, mindful use of AI, reflective, more immersive and involved, where you develop a proper dialogic exchange with the system? Or is it actually a kind of mindless, you know, reactive, where you receive whatever kind of information is there and use that passively? What am I doing for time? Oh, right, okay. And then one of the things that is another recurring theme in our discussion is what Margaret talked about, which is those paradoxes of AI. And I think we can kind of apply those paradoxes quite nicely to the will context. And this is a sort of argument we discussed kind of earlier, really, the extent to which there's a paradox around AI being at one level an important mediator for learning, independence and professional agency, but leading to a kind of dependency or a sycophancy. I like that kind of term, really. It's that idea of how much is there a sort of trade-off, you know, using AI in a kind of passive way where you cede kind of, you know, your knowledge to the system, but don't actually co-produce any kind of knowledge in the process. To what extent is AI an enricher of skills and potentially meaningful work, but a potential source of work de-skilling and alienation? To what extent does it generate opportunities whilst exacerbating inequalities in terms of the access and outcomes from Gen AI? So I thought I'd kind of throw those in as kind of further provocations about thinking about that sort of relational problem between the users of AI, how it's situated in workplaces, and the potential kind of benefits and challenges. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Folks, let's just leave our mics on so we can ask questions back and forth. You really needed to know that, people online, but it's really mostly for your benefit. So I hope you don't mind. Fantastic. Any thoughts in response?
No, no. Never. I know she's going to be. It's interesting. I don't want to make this the my physiotherapist story, but it was in her comments when I asked her why she thought her colleagues were using ChatGPT and why she didn't. She said she felt like she had a real connection between the work she was doing and her future life, like the training that she was doing, and she saw that connection. Do you think that lack of connection? I heard you use the word sycophancy, and I wonder that is it a dependency, a sycophancy, or is it also partially a misunderstanding of the connection, or not even misunderstanding, a lack of understanding of the connection between the work they're doing and the profession that they're chasing down?
Yeah, I think ideally, if the Gen AI is to have some kind of purchase, it would be really to try and enhance professional capability and professional identity and professionalism. All those kind of things are important. But one of the problems is that sort of the kind of quality and the richness of that interaction and some kind of co-production, if you like, between the learner and the system. So they're getting something from it rather than just sort of passive sort of recycling of information. And I think that's kind of, we know there are different levels of usage of Gen AI, the extent to which it's, you know, a convenience tool that helps with administrative processes, that allows people then to get on with more sort of meaningful kind of work that they kind of value and get some satisfaction out of. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it kind of, it's, you know, that sort of sycophancy. How much are you questioning, you know, the quality and the veracity of the sort of information that's coming there, and how much does that information situate itself in the context of work and help you deal with those kind of difficult, abstract, contextual problems that I think are so endemic to the nature of professional activity?
I was going to give an example just to make it more concrete, but I can move on to my bit if you like.
Why not? Let's move on to you, Rolla.
Yeah.
So I actually, so this system, I apologize. I think I needed a better system, but it's working okay. So bear with me. This is Professor Rolla Ajawi, and for those of you who are familiar with Rolla from CRADLE, it gives me great sorrow to say she's now from the University of British Columbia, and has also come a very long way. And of course, completely delighted to have Rolla back on our shores again.
It's so nice to be here and so great to see so many friendly faces, and meeting new people, of course. My theme is to talk about inequity. And in particular, I'm going to focus on two things. The first thing is about how we scaffold equity deserving students throughout WIL experiences. And the second thing is to talk about starting to recognize the potential for Gen AI to actually exacerbate inequity and to think about ways of harnessing it to combat that. And then I'm going to end on the possibility for more of that equipping of human capabilities and what that might look like. So WIL placements can be exclusionary, right? So we know that potentially some of them can be inflexible in terms of hours. So if you need to leave and go home and as a single parent to pick up a child, then that opportunity might not be there for you. Whilst as workers, we can sometimes negotiate that and do that and then continue working at home. It is also problematic from the sense of placement poverty, and that's been put on the table recently by the government, although the solution was to only make it visible for 3 professions, which makes it more problematic in some sense. So for those students of ours who might need to work and are the main income winners, actually being on placement for the whole day, potentially then having to give up a job, not having income. It's really problematic. And some students actually drop out of courses or choose not to do particular courses that have core requirements for placements. Other ways it can be discriminatory for minoritized students, students with disabilities, international students. They are not able to source as many placements as their colleagues potentially. And we also know that they might not get access to learning opportunities on placements. For example, in my field, patients can be quite racist, and they don't want that particular student to actually treat them, and they say no, and that's documented in the literature, and so the student doesn't get the learning opportunity. So how do we level the playing field through Gen AI in our workplaces, in our well-integrated learning placements? So potentially it could be used for strong orientation practices to specific workplaces, especially for first and family students, or any students, really international students who might need that extra scaffolding around a walkthrough through the potential workplace that might be facilitated virtually or through other means. We could use SIM as a stepping stone and Gen AI as a simulation stepping stone before students are fully out there in the placement. It could be used for feedback loops, not as a replacement for the supervisor, but as adjacent to and alongside the relationship with their supervisor. And I do acknowledge the risk of students then not going to their supervisor for certain questions, and relying wholly on the AI because of the power differentials, which disrupts the relationship, but also potentially if the answer is incorrect, or there is always an answer, that can be problematic. But feedback loops, potentially, you know, if you have to write a report or a handover or something, it could be used to do that before actually then getting some feedback conversation with the expert on the ground. And also potentially it could scaffold difficult conversations. So we talk about feedback literacy, feedback agency, or if someone sees something unprofessional going on, or they're being excluded from learning opportunities, perhaps they can practice with the Gen AI at home about how they might raise this conversation with their supervisor. Of course, this is not easy, and the power differential is huge, especially around assessment. Another way I might think about it is for those who already work in industries in which they are choosing to join, could we somehow personalize Gen AI to scaffold and stretch them further within those places that they work already, so that we capitalize on that work experience? So that's one aspect. The second aspect is to really, and I'm not utopian. Anyone who knows me knows very well that I'm not half glass empty, full. There you go. So we really need to be very real about the potential for exacerbating inequity. So algorithms are very well known for replicating biases that exist out there in society. And Ruha Benjamin's book on race after technology is absolutely beautiful if you're interested in this topic. Silicon Valley developing these 99% male dominated, who is not in the room developing these AIs, the biases in the material that is fed into algorithms represent society biases already. Let me give you an example. In medical education, there's a school in the US that got bequeathed a lot of money, and they, on the proviso that the ability to enter medical school is completely free for students. And so they got 10,000 applications. And so they had to screen 10,000 applications for however many hundred of spots. So they used Gen AI as a pre-screening tool to then cut that down to something that they could use to then go through the normal selection processes. Now, because this was research, they really did a lot of work to validate the algorithm. And what they found was that the algorithm, the Gen AI, was as accurate as faculty. Now, we know faculty have biases and that the medical student cohorts aren't as representative of a population as we want them to be. But also, I guess now they've done this work to validate, how often do we have to do this? How often do we need to check on the forms of equity that we want when our population is changing, for example. Who does that work? Maybe we can control for gender, but can we control for gender and race and sexuality and all the hidden other markers we discriminate against? So I guess what I'm saying is we need to attune our students to the real possibility that AI will have inequitable impacts and that these need to be monitored. What can we do about it? I'm not sure. I think it's a conversation we need to have. One example we see out there in health is that they're bringing together end user groups of patients who the algorithm kind of triage to get treatment in particular ways, and the health professionals and lots of people from community to actually look at what this work is doing and to co-design it differently. What other outputs do we want this to be able to do? I'm a bit vague on that, but could we in university co-design, bring students to look at what this is doing and think about ways of using it more equitably, for example, to actually disrupt the inequity. Another thought around that was also to, that was one thought, sorry, other thought's gone, but it will come back. So the co-design to combat inequity, and also that's to tune them into this possibility. So what are then, it kind of gets us to the point of thinking about how we equip with human capabilities. So the human capabilities that we really need are learning to doubt the AI, to use Margaret's words, and work with uncertainty, which is what Dave's already brought up. And there's a real potential that AI is actually going to increase uncertainty in working with it out there, if it's giving you, especially if it's giving you different judgments to what you believe. And my last point is about EJ, because evaluative judgment's really important here, and developing students' evaluative judgment of both the outputs and processes of AI, and learning to interrogate the data and the ways in which AI is influencing the practice.
Thank you so much, Rolla. Am I on? Yep. So I won't invite questions for Rolla. We'll just roll on over to Dave.
So I went over time, no surprise.
Yes, it's not to silence you, of course, Rolla.
So sorry, Dave, because I chose to do this person by person. But Professor David Bowd from CRADLE needs no introduction, of course. So now I've done my job, Dave. It's over to you.
Okay, thanks, Margaret. What I want to do is I want to start from the work integrated learning placement end and then move towards Gen AI. The situation we find ourselves in Australia at the moment is that work integrated learning is being undertaken by more students than ever before, in more courses than ever before. And it's also occurring not just in the traditional areas we're familiar with, the health areas, education, and so on and so forth, but it's been taken up in areas that we've talked about loosely coupled. So the placement is loosely coupled with the rest of the course. And this means that some of the taken for granted assumptions we make about how how placement works, are no longer valid. For example, we're not out there with them. We don't visit them. There isn't a kind of a scheduled set of learning activities that go on. So this new space that's opening up, very large new space, is one that we need to pay particular attention to. And there's no way we can conceive of having the same resources to support that space as we've had, for example, traditionally in medicine or teacher education. They're not going to miraculously appear unless we stop teaching a whole lot of other courses, and that's just not going to happen. So what I want to do is to look at this situation from a learning perspective. So when students go out there, they get the experience of work. Might be good experience, might be bad experience, but they certainly are immersed in work in one sense. And one of the traps, of course, when they go out there is that they get so caught up in the everyday doing of things that they actually lose track of what they're there for as a learner, because they're not an employee. They're not there to draw a wage. In fact, that's quite problematic. They're there to learn something, and they continually get distracted from that. So what I wanted to do is to kind of examine what are some of the affordances of those placements and what are some of the absences that occur. So some of the affordances are obvious in that they're engaged with real people in that profession doing work that they can recognise as the kind of work that they may or may not be doing when they graduate. They have access to other people. They often work in teams. They've got access to organisational resources, and they confront real problems in the messy way that real problems present themselves. That's distinct from the nice clean ways they present themselves in our courses. But, and this is the big but, there's a whole lot of absences here compared with what they experience on campus or even online. So isolation from their student peers. They're all dotted all over the place in different kind of placements. There's an absence from teachers. There aren't people that they can have easily educational learning discussions with. They can have discussions with the people in the workplace about issues to do with work, but the people there, their responsibility to get on with the job. It's not really their responsibility to induct the student, help them learning. And they don't have sounding boards. They're new, they're isolated, they don't have mates, they don't have friends around them. So often what they have is the absence of an interlocutor. And that is someone they can have a dialogue about, that they can easily have a dialogue about when they're in their courses. There's all their mates that are, around them in their classes. They're teachers, they're tutors, they're people they encounter in one way or another. And these, from the learning dialogue perspective, are absent. So what that leads us to think about is, well, how can students create their own learning environment in these workplaces? And this is an incredibly burdensome and challenging things to do. I mean, there's so many things the students have got to manage. Are we asking them to manage their own learning environment as well? And what can we do to help them? So it's within this space that we're starting to think of Gen AI. In what ways, or can indeed Gen AI fill this gap? Now, the more we talked about it, the more it became apparent that there were some really good things it could do, but the generality is no. I mean, we can't expect this technology to fill all these different gaps because all these different things do different things for the student. So what then we need to focus on is what it can do. And then we're confronted with this dilemma that Gen AI was developed as a productivity tool. It was not designed, it was not developed as a learning tool. We and our students are now appropriating it as a learning tool, but it wasn't set up that way. So it gives answers, it doesn't pose questions. And one of the things we need when we're learning something is not to be told more stuff, but to have questions, prompts to our own self-regulation. So this are the things that we need to build into any design that we have. And we talked in this context of, can we develop a will bot? And what would a will bot look like? And even if we could conceive of a will bot, what is it that we would need to feed into that to customize what is existing Gen AI for the unique features of a learning environment rather than a multi-purpose tool that can be used in any way? And of course, we identified a whole range of things. It needs to be sensitive to certain issues about sharing of the organization's IP. Some organizations have their own Gen AI, which you can use, but you can only use it there. They don't want you to use someone else's because their IP might leak out somewhere else. There are local cultural practices which can't be predicted and might not be determined by us in advance. There are kind of issues of equity that Rola mentioned. And of course, it needs to recognise this massive, massive variability in the students and in the learning affordances of the work site. So a chatbot might be used to help us in some of this range of conditions and not in others. So we also talked about why maybe we need different variations of a Willbot. Some are there directly for students to support student learning, but also might be necessary to help us supervisors, where there are supervisors, because often there aren't, and manage the whole situation. So there's all sorts of devices and strategies we have in Will, but can we translate them into the multiplicity of circumstances? So we started to discuss some of the design attributes for a Willbot, but I'm not going to go into them now because time doesn't permit. And I think Simon Buckingham-Shum, who's part of those discussions, might be able to usefully comment on that himself later. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dave. And to that point, Simon was very involved in those discussions. I think he coined the term Willbot. And Simon, I'm wondering, would you like to come up and you can have my seat on the panel and maybe say a few words about that?
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, it's been a very rich conversation. So the Willbot concept is a speculative design concept that was just a foil for us to test our ideas out with. Okay, so it could be used before a will placement, during or after. And the goal here is to engage the different stakeholders in productive conversations. So for example, we take the three-way contract that is sort of ubiquitous, that's the student signs up to engage in their placement, the university has agreed with the employer what's going to happen, but we know it's breaking down because, for example, stuff changes in the workplace, right? We could imagine the Willbot in dialogue with the supervisor, adopting an appropriate tone of voice, engaging the supervisor in negotiating what might we change now for this cohort or for the student who's with you, because you've suddenly got to pivot and jump on something else, right? Of course, we're talking about talking. I mean, you can be literally talking to the bot now. It's not about texting. And if you've ever heard AI voice now, it's very compelling. We could have the bot talking to the academic. We've heard about how formal academic assessment may be somewhat disconnected from the actual experience the student has had, because academics don't fully understand the rich array of professional workplace learning that goes on, and they've given something terribly formal to the students, who now have to try and re-express what they've been experiencing and learning in a slightly strange way. Maybe we can have the bot giving some constructive feedback to the academic that this assessment design could be improved if you're interested, to give space for students to give voice to their experience. And then there's the student, of course, where the student is, as we've heard, potentially remote, disconnected, unsupported. Yes, chatbots can give great empathy and tell you how great you are and come up with suggestions. But we're not really talking about just taking a bot from OpenAI or Google or Anthropic out of the box and just deploying this, right? It's not secure. And moreover, the bot needs to be able to Dave's point, promote learning. Since when did a bot stretch you out of your comfort zone? That's not what it's trained to do. It's, as we've heard, sycophantic in a sense that, this is a phenomenon that the computer scientists are working on, how you reduce its sycophancy and its desire to please, because that's not what a student always needs. So we're talking about a bot that is trained up to hold particularly interesting kinds of conversations with the student, potentially challenge and stretch them, refer them if it's picking up, emotional distress, to the appropriate people. It's grounded in the best will scholarship, research, and evidence. We now know how to build bots that are grounded in a particular perspective, a particular theoretical perspective, to conduct a conversation of a particular sort. So, we might be building on top of a ChatGPT, but it's got layers and filters and guidance and architectures and scripts and lots of built-in safety rails as well. So that was our design concept that was weaving in and out of our conversation.
Thank you so much, Simon. So, a special guest appearance on the panel from Simon Buckingham-Shum, who is, what's your official title, Simon? Professor of something.
Learning informatics.
Learning informatics. There you have it. It's just as impressive as Simon. It fits in. So we've got a bit of time now, just before we close the formal session, move on to the open questions. For a couple of questions, I'll take one from the floor and one from online. So has anyone got a burning question for any of our panelists on the floor?
Hi, my name's Craig Bellamy. I'm an independent learning designer, freelance. Maybe a question to the first one. It's something I think assessment is like the real flashpoint for everyone, especially in higher education. But saying that in the first one, like with Will, I don't understand Will that well, but I imagine there's some sort of assessment, like the report you have to write. Is there any way you could sort of tweak that or rewrite it for AI world, so the students wouldn't use AI, or at least they're using it in a way that you're assessing them and not the synthetic writing?
Absolutely. Again, what I would say is, if you've created an assignment for a student that they can use Gen AI to complete it, it was probably needed to be redesigned in the first place. So I would say that the advice is the same. It needs to be more relevant, more contextualized, and set up in such a way that it won't respond to those kinds of things. So some of that's just about making the assignment so contextual that it's more work to get a chatbot to answer it than it is to do it yourself. Yeah. So if it's super contextual to the activity, it's more difficult to get a chatbot to do it. And then also, like in those kinds of situations, I'm not sure. Again, like I said, I never cross-examined my physiotherapist, so I don't know the specifics of the case. But being present while those reports are being written is not a complicated thing in a work environment. Some of it's just about reorganizing where assessments happen as well. So some of it's about the design, some of it's about the context.
Okay, thank you.
Did either of the Cradle folk want to respond?
Answer the assessment question Cradle.
No. We know nothing about assessment here. Yes. I think there are a number of issues here. At the moment, we can design it so it's very localized, very contextualized, very immediate, and that will probably help students not use Gen AI effectively to respond to the assessment. But that is being eroded as we speak. So maybe in a year's time, that won't be true. So we can't guarantee that students won't use these devices in ways that are undetectable to us. At the moment, it is undetectable already, except for some very obvious things, like it hallucinates, it makes up false references and things like that. But that's not going to be around forever. So it will get better. But the thing that concerns me most is the stereotypical use of assessment activities in work integrated learning. The idea that you do a placement and then you write a report. This is terrible. Yeah, and the other way is the reflective essay, write a reflective essay about what you did. These are absolutely guaranteed to prompt students to use these other devices, not because they can use the device as well, but because they've got no relationship to the real learning that students got from that placement. So we need to be thinking about our assessment ChatGPT and all that, because they weren't very good back then. So we need to actually fix them anyway and make them respond more effectively to the nature of the experience of learning that students have had.
The only other thing I would add is about actually looking at processes throughout the placement and not just the final product. So having students actually generate a variety of videos, multimedia of them doing work out there that is the process towards which the final report project, whatever it is that they're doing, is actually embedded around them doing the thing, if you see what I mean, as they progress through the placement.
Thank you so much, Rola and Dave. And we took a bit of time on that question, a good one, because everyone always wants to know about it. But I just want to go back to that point. In our symposium, we were really focused on what looking beyond some of that immediate concern about, cheating as well as the immediate sort of hyper excitement about possibility. And I think that was very much a theme. And you can hear through the 4 talks that everyone took that sort of view. Things are quite complex, and there are, I suppose I introduced the word paradox. You can see the paradoxical talk and thinking that runs through everything that we were saying. I'm going to bring the formal session to a close, which means that some folk who need to go, it's been an hour, it's a long time, particularly people online, you may wish to leave. We're going to keep on going otherwise, but at this point, I would really formally like to thank our 4 panellists for their wonderful contributions. So to note that the panel has given you a very fair reflection, I think, of the sorts of things we were grappling with. And you can see there are questions, more questions, some ideas, but this isn't something place we're going to land quickly or faster, nor should we. It is for talking about uncertainty here, it runs through from the students to us as well. Now, oh, sorry, one more formal thing. We have another seminar that's happening near the end of this month, and this is where I really have done poorly on my planning. I can't actually remember the date off the top of my head. It is near the end of October. I think it's the 29th. It's a wonderful Ros Black who will be talking about imaginaries of social imaginaries of the digital from the perspective of leadership in higher education. So please keep open for that. Otherwise, we move right back to our questions. So I will go online next.
So we do have a few online questions. We've got 3 with equal upvotes. So we'll go in order of first in, best dressed in the ancient style. So anonymous attendee asks you a question, Roller, I believe. Do these challenges that you were discussing, student isolation, the need for support, equity and inclusion challenges, provide an argument for will to be scaffolded throughout academic studies rather than just being used as a capstone?
I would say yes is the short answer. Yes, I mean, everything we do in curricula is about the spiral curriculum, is about revisiting increasing complexity and stretching and challenging the individual student as they progress through a degree. And so, yeah, placements also can follow that model. It just means that you need to put more into a placement, and then we might need to think about, rather than full blocks of them, because actually that becomes really hard to find enough placements and schedules. We might actually start to think about other models which are more longitudinal, but perhaps part-time, or, so that's when the innovative thinking might come into it. So we're back and forth between workplaces and curricula and the formal more often, and we're integrating that learning from both and scaffolding that better.
Do we have another question before we go back to online? Yeah, Liz.
Thank you, and thank you to the panellists. Liz Johnson, I'm here from Deakin. I'm going to ask you a bit of a sideways question, panel. We've been talking about how generative AI can contribute to work-integrated learning, but there's another aspect of generative AI in the workplace and how it's changing professional identity. And it seems to me that this is a transitionary phase as professions move into the normal space. But work-integrated learning relies on the university having some view of what that professional identity and work is. How do we navigate the transition?
Okay, I'm holding the microphone. I might let it down eventually. Can I start with an example? In health, a big conversation at the moment is that AI will do all the menial tasks, which will automatically leave all this space for health professionals to do the compassionate care. And you can imagine where actually throughput is often optimized in our current health systems. You could argue in our educational systems too. Actually, what will end up happening is that we just see more patients and we get through them just faster. And the AI really could actually just create other admin anyway, rather than just get rid of all the menial tasks. So to come back to your question, Liz, I think what we risk is that the professional disciplinary notions of what it means to be that really change in negative ways, where we actually lose the design of our work practices and what is meaningful to us, and see that to other people who want to prioritize efficiency. And so I did say I was not glass half full. But to come back to what universities, and so we need the space. We need to give actually professionals out there in the workplace also the space to step away and think about how to design their own practices differently, and what empowerment they might have to have those conversations. And maybe that's an opportunity for us to have that conversation with them about the design of what our practices could look like with AI.
Okay.
I think one of the issues we face is that we've kind of got this bifurcation down the university. There are interactions that we have with industry because we do research with them, and then there are interactions we have with industry because we send students to them. And somehow these two never coincide. And in one, we actually learn quite a lot about the industry because we go out there and talk to people and find out what's going on. In the other, increasingly because of the resource pressure, we send our students off and the students learn things, but we don't. So I think there's a possibility in the future of utilizing our links with industry, that is the placement sites, not just to send students off there and to kind of basically ignore everything they do, but to engage meaningfully with them. So maybe we need some kind of hybrid activities within the university in which we're collaborating with particular sites, in which that collaboration occurs both in research and both in student placements. Now, this has occurred in the past, but somehow it comes up and then it dies down again, mostly because of resource pressure. But I think we've got to kind of push back on that.
Anyone else on the panel?
I'll just such advanced technology. Yeah, I mean, I think that this issue of professionalism and professional identity is so kind of important, particularly for undergrads or whoever's undertaking a placement. And one of the challenges, I think, for Will and in relation to Gen AI is the extent to which it can facilitate those more challenging kind of learning processes. Like, how do you read culture? How do you kind of navigate those trickier cultural spaces and those difficult conversations that you have in these workplaces? So how is it able to kind of form that professional identity rather than kind of subvert that kind of formation? I think that's a very important kind of facet as well, because so much of this work-related learning is about kind of acculturation of particular professional practices that are valued in that particular occupational space. So I think kind of designing kind of assessment around that becomes, a challenge and a necessity.
I want to take a specific example from education. So 3 or 4 years ago, we started to talk about students who in my country were being told by their attending teachers, which is what we call them in Canada, that they were to pay $2 on teachers by teachers online to get something to teach the next day. And it's obviously a challenge. There's a sense in which the creation of materials to teach in a classroom becomes an intersection of a conversation around professionalism. Not only in the idea that you're not creating it, but also in the idea that those are not being reviewed by anybody. And if you're in a hurry and not looking at them, and we've had some pretty sketchy cases where people have used some very inappropriate material in classrooms because they never really looked at it before they brought it in. So we were having that conversation 3, 4, 5 years ago. And then Gen AI came along, and then suddenly you can create resources at the drop of a hat to walk into a classroom with, which contain all of the same problems. I think of one of the images that we used as an example in the classroom for me last year when I was working with my students before their placement, where it was an image. We asked for an image of a woman riding a bike, and it was an image, woman on a bike, no pants. Because again, these are drawing from the internet, and we don't necessarily want, particularly when we're using the standard, and Simon has made this clear throughout the conversation, if you're using the standard chatbot for this, you're really not doing the work you should probably be doing. But half the class hadn't noticed that she wasn't wearing pants because it looked like she was wearing a pants of a color that was actually the texture of the rest of her, but it wasn't, right? So if you're not checking for these things, we're bringing random things into the classroom. And because of the speed, because of the overwork inside of that system, the idea of being a professional and what's a professional action for pulling that together is increasingly changing. We have a couple of real problems there. Now, some of that is that our faculty are not on top of this because they're not facing the same pressures. They're teaching the same courses year after year. And the idea of desperately not knowing what you're teaching the next day is not something that they're aware of. And for those of you who may or may not know how the education system works in Canada, those teachers who, when they start, they're very precarious, very occasional workers who are called at 7:30 in the morning to teach at 8 o'clock. So if you've got that much time to think about it, you're going to do a quick search on something, grab some stuff, and then go in there, right? I think that at that intersection, Gen AI becomes a really important conversation for us, not just for our students, but for how our students coming out of our schools, hopefully inform the industry about what professionalism looks like that too, which is another piece of this puzzle, which is our students, much like students 15 years ago are being hired to be the social media representatives of corporations because young people understand social media. These students going out are going to be asked questions like, how do you use that chat thing? Right. And if we don't help them get ready for that conversation, they won't be ready to answer those questions later, or at least to go, I don't know, which would be the starting point, or at least I don't know enough to inform you what it means to be a professional inside the space using this tool.
Thank you. And no, fabulous to have all of your thoughts. Tom, I will turn to the very patient upvoted questions. Maybe they've changed since you last looked.
They have slightly, but they're all very interesting. It's very hard to choose them. But since Dave, so you were just talking, this is a question that might take what you were just talking about a little bit more into Will and back to what you're talking about, ambiguity. So Paul asks, in a low tolerance for ambiguity world, how do we make the messy but enduring learning that occurs through Will more desirable, more sexy? If students and supervisors are increasingly wedded to use of Gen AI for immediacy, how can we sell the sacrificing current performance for future enduring benefits?
Question.
Cool. I thought you were going to answer that because I was like, oh God, that means I don't have to answer it. I mean, I don't think we know. Like if I knew the answer to that question, I would have told everybody already. I think I go back to my physiotherapist, frankly. I wish she was here. It's about understanding how uncertainty connects to practice, right? Preparing for real world challenges is not about preparing to have answers for things. It's about preparing for the time when you don't have the answer for something and when the answer probably doesn't exist, right? And so for me in my classrooms, when I'm trying to make this pitch to my students, I'm trying to make connections to their real life experiences where they know uncertainty is the way of the world. They know that being tolerant to the ambiguity is important to them, being successful as a parent, as a partner, with your girlfriend, like all those things. That tolerance for ambiguity is essential for us as social creatures. And then trying to draw a connection between that and their future life, in this case, when I'm talking to my students as teachers, ambiguity is your life as a teacher, right? And what I'm trying to do is help them build that tolerance so that they can be better teachers, hopefully lower that sense of anxiety they're going to have when they walk into a classroom by maybe cranking it up a little bit inside my classroom. Protected, structured, scaffolded. But yeah, it's about understanding the connection to practice, I think.
So Dave, here's an example. So say, you've got a teacher on placement, a school teacher, and you ask them to develop a school plan, a lesson plan. And they develop a lesson plan, and that's an artifact of an assessment. But actually then they run the lesson, and it doesn't run anything like the lesson plan, as we know. And so then that creates an opportunity, doesn't it, for actually thinking about how the messy world of practice kind of intersects with theory, and what are the things that you know, oh, well, you handled it that way, but actually this is another way, but we don't know which one could have been better. It's just, this is how it happened in the class.
Totally. I call those my activities the teacher voice activities. So you do the activity, and then what was the voice that you wish you had in your head that day? What should it have told you? So you know that little Jimmy doesn't have a computer at home, and you know that little Jimmy always gets frustrated whenever he touches a computer. So you should have been standing there as soon as you handed the computers out, because that would have gotten you ahead of the process. And then he wouldn't have thrown it on the floor, and then the person next to him wouldn't have cried, and then all that thing wouldn't have fallen apart. But it's about developing that teacher voice, right? And so that's the perfect activity. So you tried it, you did it. What should you have been thinking? What could you have be thinking next time? And then the next time you build it, what teacher voice activities do you put in there as a reminder to yourself? But what happens in the sort of hidden, sort of contextual, weird part of teaching?
I'll take another one online, Tom. I'm so tempted to jump into the conversation, but I think one voice too many. No. Yeah, I'm being very restrained.
We've been missing them so far, but there's actually quite a few questions about the chatbot, about Willbot, whose name you haven't actually shared with us yet, Simon. Are you trying to patent that for yourself? But the question is about how the chatbot will be built, I believe. So the question is, do you see value in students populating a chatbot as well as staff? Perhaps for questions they may have that are more horizontal rather than vertical, perhaps similar to the old and very much lamented LMS discussion board.
Jax. Do I see students populating the chatbot? I'm not actually sure what that means. I certainly see students be involved in the co-design of it, just as I would see, you know, academics and employers. So big fan of co-design and human-centered design. That's where I come from. That's the sort of lens I've brought to this conversation. That doesn't mean students are great designers either, by the way. People know they're experiencing symptoms. They don't necessarily know what the diagnosis is for you know, that's why we have designers, right? We still need designers, and we don't always listen to everything and give students or teachers everything they want. So, but I'm not sure that I understand what students populating the bot means. So
I think co-designing, I think putting in perspectives, the kinds of things that they might be encountering. I think the point about learning management systems where you're, discussion boards, where you're, you know, talking to your mates, Dave was getting to as well. The idea that, you know, you need to have a chat about X, Y, and Z. Is that the kind of thing that the Willbot might be able to cover?
Oh, I see. Okay, so just having a chat with ChatGPT could be helpful. But we've had some quite good conversations here about where you don't want ChatGPT just to tell you you're awesome, or give you
I do actually.
We'll talk about that later, Dave. But I mean, one of the chats I had here was, what if you basically need a kick up the pants, or you know you're lazy? You could ask the chatbot to be your constructive, friendly bully coach, right? If you've got enough insight. We also know students don't always have great insight into their weaknesses, but it might be that a chatbot could diagnose something that, not in a clinical, you know, counseling kind of way, but this student needs some help here, and you're not going to get ChatGPT doing that. It's got to be prompted and designed to step in and make a move like that in a conversation. That's what a good mentor or coach does, right? That's what a good friend does, right? A friend will actually speak truth to you. And, you know, and we said, can a chatbot conduct a tough love conversation? Was one of our conversations here, right? What does that mean? That's a pretty complex thing. Chatbots will not know what's going on in your messy contextual organizational setting, but they could ask some artful questions to get the student thinking reflectively about that, for example. So again, it's a role for bots. They don't have to be know-it-alls, but they can ask some jolly helpful questions.
And I cannot restrain myself. I just think we also just need to be careful not to invest Gen AI with things we can do adequately in other forums. I think that's really a singular point. And it might be there might be other better ways to do that work, which is important. Another question from the floor.
Thanks, Jack. Thank you very much. I was thinking about the overlap between will and non-will, so normal education or whatever you want to call it, and Dave's comment, which I can kind of seeing as a bigger overlap between those things, a bigger integration, but also the fact that I don't really like the separation between university and the real world that we often talk about. And I don't like the idea that set workplaces are the real world. So I'm just wondering if the panel talked more broadly about what a placement could be in other contexts that, and think of disciplines that aren't so neatly aligned to professions where I'm doing some sort of quite vague course that nobody could possibly tell me what career I'm going to go into afterwards. What kind of placements could I do while I'm doing that could be helpful? So sorry, it's a bit of a late in the day question, but did you talk more broadly about?
Yeah, that's a notion of loosely coupled. So we did talk, and I think, Dave, you might want to speak to that because that was where you were focusing, in fact.
Yes, I think this is the whole area that's most undercooked. We've got a whole lot of range of practices and procedures and ways of doing things in those tightly coupled areas. But most of the new will is in the loosely coupled areas. And what that is doing is it's putting a lot more agency on the part of the learner to find the placement and choose a placement that meets their own needs and aspirations. And what that means is that we won't know where they're going. We won't know much about the kind of work they do. We won't know much about the learning affordances of that particular workplace. So this is the space in which we need help, because it's not as if we can kind of put a whole lot of resources and more manpower to do it. But what we can do is that we can draw upon these devices that help students have more meaningful interactions and dialogue and prompt them to elicit what they need to elicit from that workplace, to monitor what they're doing there, to prompt them with feedback processes they might initiate, and so on and so forth. So we can't change the whole nature of the placement because we've got not enough control over that. And I'm not sure it will even be desirable for us to have a lot more control, but we've got to face this uncertainty and equip the students as best we can.
Yes. This is the last question from the floor, then we will return online.
Hello, Sally Bale, Director of the Teaching and Learning Lab in Engineering and IT at the University of Melbourne. Engineering is one of these, I would say it's one of these loosely coupled areas where we had extraordinarily loosely coupled internships in the past. And thanks to the changes, we now have slightly less loosely coupled internships. And one of the big problems is that and I think this is exactly what you've been alluding to, David, the placements are, in these placements, students will often experience engineering practices, workplace practices that might be unethical, unsafe, maybe even the technology is not used properly. Now, increasingly, AI is also being used in many ways. The culture might be inappropriate, especially not inclusive for for women, and maybe practices might not be as sustainable as they could be. You talked about this lovely bot, the AI bot, communicating with the students, maybe with the academics, the supervisors from the university. We know with work integrated learning, it's all about a three-way connection, and the supervisors are really critical. So were you thinking about any interaction with the supervisors, with the workplace possibly? One of the things I see also with your comment around reducing that bifurcation between the interactions that universities have with in terms of teaching interactions with the workplace and research interactions with the workplace is that we actually have an opportunity to improve practice. And one of the opportunities with AI is that we can deal with much larger data sets than in the past. So maybe there's an opportunity to do something where we bring together. My reaction in terms of dealing with this loosely coupled in the past has been we must have students interacting with other students in other workplaces. So at least they see the they don't take their one experience in their one workplace as the norm, and they see other examples. But maybe with AI, there are opportunities to somehow link and see the patterns among the students' experiences across vast numbers of workplaces. So I'd love to hear your response to those sorts of ideas.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing we haven't talked much about. We talk about the experience of students in the workplace and focus on that. But of course, the other thing that we undercook a great deal is when students return from their placement to the university, what do we do? And this is a place where they can interact, they can see other people's experience, and they can share and they can raise some of these issues. I think the dilemma you're pointing to about dodgy practice on the part of the workplace is very challenging for us, because we have a contract, whether it's written or not, with the workplace that says you're there to help students learn and do things with respect to your work. If we then start to come in and start to challenge them about the nature of what they do in their own work, they'll just say, go away, go away. So the issue for me is, how do we create the conditions under which we can have discussions of that kind? And we have to have a different kind of contract with an organisation to even allow us to raise it as an issue, whether or not we use Gen AI in some intermediate form or not. So that's a really big will issue.
So I'm going to unfortunately say to folk online, we're going to have to stop questions now because we're almost at time. So panel, I was hoping you would give us one final, very quick reflection, and we'll go in the order that you were talking. So start with Dave C and end up with Dave B. And you have to remember how to use your microphone.
Why? I'm just stalling now because I'm trying to figure what are the 12 things that just popped into my head after all this say. I think one of the things that has been really clear in these sessions the last 3 days, and even the conversations we're having here, it's really early days. I think we're very much in a period of transition right now. I know Simon said something that really struck me in the middle of our session yesterday, where he said, yeah, I don't know that all this prompt engineering stuff is really going to matter, because pretty soon we're not going to be doing any of that anyway. There's going to be an interface in front of that. And I went, oh, he's probably right about that. So I think everything that we're doing now has to be iterative, like on a really tight cycle where we keep winding back on these things and looking at them again and again and again. It's not very encouraging, but
Thanks. I mean, this symposium has been really useful insofar as it's got us all thinking about what are the core principles of will, what are students' motives, and what are the outcomes of it? What are we hoping to do when students, whether it's tightly coupled, loosely coupled, hoping to gain out of it? And that's so important with that. And I mean, I think the most important things for me is how work integrated learning is so central to, professional formation, professional socialization and identity building, all those kind of important things, and meaning making. Now, the question then is, where does AI fit into this? And as I say, I think we are in an early stage, but it's to what extent can we build that sort of architecture so that we're in a position to help students deal with those challenging issues of workplace culture and how to develop professional values and identities, and that's important. And I think the idea of assessment is a huge sticking point in this. The extent to which we can move towards sustainable assessment in work integrated learning, rather than the sort of token transitory assessment that actually has no value to students. How can they actually learn to become sustainable professionals over a significant period of time? And I'd be interested to see how AI can actually start facilitating that.
One thing, I think we need to be really mindful of the potential that AI can exacerbate inequity, and we need to really be mindful of collecting data to keep and monitor to ensure that it doesn't. But ultimately, it comes back to good educational design as well. And I think we have a lot of our I don't want to say answers, but we have good pedagogical principles that might actually drive some of our assessment design and our will placements. It's more about setting up systems to do that, and perhaps AI might reduce some of that barrier for it, as well as creating some other ones.
Last word, Dave.
I think this whole new technology is a big challenge for us, but I think it's important that we don't get spooked. But also it's very important we don't listen to people that think they really know what should be done. So there's a whole lot of educators wanting to come up with rules and processes, and this is how you do it. We're not quite in that state yet. So the challenge is to hold things lightly and see how they emerge. But the thing we mustn't do is to kind of pretend it's not all happening and hope it goes away. It is not going to go away.
Well, on that note, thank you all very much. Thanks for panel. And those who are in the room, we have refreshments out there. I think it's cheese and drinks and that kind of thing today. And I did actually, and forgive me, the next symposium, CRADLE seminar is on the 30th of October, which is Wednesday, Nostalgic Stories in Academic Imaginaries of the Digital, Ros Black, 2 to 3:30. So hopefully see you then.